welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Welcome back to another episode of It's an Inside Job. I'm your host, Jason Lim, and today we have a truly special guest joining us to delve into the transformative topic that has the power to change lives. Now, core transformation is a unique process that helps individuals access deep wellspring of inner peace and well-being. It's a journey that allows us to turn our most challenging issues into profound resources, fostering a sense of wholeness and fulfillment. Now, this process involves a series of steps that guides individuals to access core states, such as peace, love, and oneness, and integrate these states into our daily lives. Now, by doing so, core transformation achieves lasting change without struggle, enabling individuals to resolve inner conflicts and live their more authentic, empowered lives. And today, well, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Tamara Andreas. Now, Tamara is an international transformational seminar leader and writer. Now, she co-authored this seminal book, Core Transformation, Reaching the Wellspring Within. Recently, she also penned the microbook, Change Without Struggle. And so in today's episode, we're going to explore exactly what core transformation is. And Tamara, well, at the end of the episode, she's going to lead us through a short practice, making this episode a kind of hands-on episode. So without further ado, let's slip into the stream and meet Tamara Andreas. Tamara Andreas, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Well, thank you so much. And it's an honor for me to be here. I really appreciate a chance to reach out to your audience.
I was wondering, maybe we could begin by you just briefly introducing who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm an international trainer and author. I'm co-author of the book Core Transformation, Reaching the Wellspring Within from like 30 years ago. And also I've recently written a microbook, Change Without Struggle, that gives a brief, simple introduction to core transformation. And so basically, for the past 3 decades, core transformation has been a major focus of my work. I work with clients as well as leading transformational seminars and advanced skills trainings as well with core transformation. Mm-hmm.
For our listenership who may not have heard of core transformation, I was wondering if you can explain what core transformation is, just sort of begin with the basics.
Yeah, you bet. So it's a gentle process. So by process, it's like an inner exploration for transforming behaviors, emotional responses, and patterns of thinking that we don't like. And what's kind of unique and special about it is that doing the process feels like being kind to ourselves. So it can be a healing or transformation. Sometimes the experience is mild, and often it's really profound because we're tapping into a sense of our own natural beingness. And whatever we want to change actually becomes a doorway to more well-being. And the experience itself can be kind of surprising to people.
I had the benefit and the privilege of reading the book you sent me in PDF format, plus the mini book. And just to sort of generally, there's 2 major parts as I understand, or there's sort of key concepts, something you call the unconscious parts and positive purposes. I was wondering maybe we could explore each of these, because I think these are essential keystones or building blocks to the whole idea of core transformation. Perhaps we can begin with unconscious parts, what you mean by that, and maybe operationally define it for our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So, most everyone can recognize when there's something that we're doing or feeling or thinking that isn't working for us, that causes a problem, right? So we consciously recognize this. But consciously knowing about it hasn't changed it. So therefore, it's not our conscious mind that's in charge of it, we could say. So instead, it's some unconscious part of us that's generating it. It's on automatic pilot. It just kind of runs by itself from the unconscious. And so we could say then that it's as if a part of us is doing it, even though consciously we don't want it to happen. So, like, for example, let's say that I find myself eating too many cookies, but I'd really like to be eating something healthy instead. So we could say there that there's a part of me that wants to eat the cookies, and another part of me, maybe most of me, wants to eat something healthy. Or somebody else might say, there's a part of me that gets down on myself when I make a mistake, or there's a part of me that feels nervous in a certain situation, even though I would rather be relaxed and calm, that sort of thing. So whatever it is that we want to change, consciously, we already don't want it, right? So it's an unconscious part of us that's creating that experience that consciously we don't like.
And so unconscious part, as you said, it could be an emotion, it could be faulty thinking, it could be a behavior, it could be a perception or an attitude that we carry that we don't want and which we want to change.
Well, yeah, actually, I'd say that is, we could say, the surface level of this part of me.
Okay.
So yeah, at the surface, that's what we notice is the behavior or thought or feeling we want to change. And the part that's creating this, though, it's more than just that behavior, thought, or feeling. This inner part of me that's generating it, that it wants something that's positive. It's trying to do something positive for us, actually.
And that leads us to the second major concept is positive purposes. I was wondering if you could bridge that with unconscious parts and elaborate on positive purposes.
Yeah. So, this is a surprise to some people that even behaviors that we really don't like that are causing big problems for us, when we really tap into the inner part of us that's generating that, there's always something that's intended that's positive. The part's trying to get to something positive. So, like, for example, let's say that that somebody gets angry at their coworkers in certain kinds of situations, and this anger is causing problems for them, in their relationships with their coworkers, and it takes a lot of energy, is distracting. So even though it's causing trouble, the part that gets angry is attempting to do or get something positive. So maybe it wants appreciation or love. Maybe it wants, this person to stand up for herself or himself, or for their values or something else. And, we could guess what it is all day long consciously, but through core transformation, we get to discover what that unconscious part is actually trying to do or get for us. And oftentimes it actually is a surprise to people when we start to explore it.
So there's a positive intention behind the behavior we want to change, but the challenge is that behavior is sort of counterproductive. Even though the intention is positive, the way it's going about it is actually undermining us. I was just wondering, so there's these patterns of behavior that we can observe that are surface that we recognize that we don't want consciously, but unconsciously they pop up. From my experience working in clinical psychology and such, sometimes we develop patterns of behavior earlier in our lives because they are ways for us to adapt to that particular situation or challenge we've met. And as life moves on, as we evolve, as the world evolves, everything changes, but the challenge is the pattern stays stuck. And so our brains refer to this old pattern that was established years ago that served us, but in a sense, it serves against us. So is this kind of, I just want to bridge, is this kind of the connection we're making, or am I seeing it in a very sort of limited perspective?
Yes, everything that you're saying is true. And the good news, though, is that there is potential for change. So even though this unconscious part of us has been stuck in this pattern of responding with, at least on an emotional level, on an inner level, and the same pattern that's been going on since probably early childhood. um, there's a way to get this part of us unstuck that works really, really well, and it's different from how most other parts methods work. So it's not just about discovering this inner part of us and discovering that it has a positive purpose and communicating with it and getting to know it and understanding it better. It's not about understanding, really. It's about transformation, and that's what we get to do with this process.
Are there other core concepts that we should explore before we start diving deeper and deeper into core transformation?
Yeah. So one concept I think that's useful is to know that this inner part of us that, like it's generating some kind of behavior we don't like let's say it makes us anxious. And then through that, it's trying to accomplish something positive. Let's say, for example, it's trying to keep us safe. Oftentimes these inner parts, are very focused on keeping us safe, although that's not always the main thing. But yeah. So then we can explore deeper and deeper levels of what this part wants. So through getting us safe, maybe what it's trying to do for us is to help us like feel like things are okay, like a sense of okayness with the world. And as we explore to deeper and deeper levels, we always eventually get to something that's at the beingness level. So we could say that this inner part of us, its deepest yearning is for something that's at a state of being. Like the words that sometimes come out are something like presence or oneness, or a sense of love that just is. It's not about getting love from somebody else, but it's just a state of love or a sense of being. Or sometimes a person can't even put it into words. It's like a sense of their inner essence. That I've had this experience many times of, I'm not even sure what I'd call this, but it's kind of just an energetic sense that's there. And that's what this part has been trying to get all along at the deepest level. And it's in core transformation, we call this a core state. And it's always a wonderful experience, very positive. We could say that it's an experience of our actual true inner nature. And when we get to this, then this is very transformative. It's a very transformative experience. It's not just a concept. It's an experience of it, and that then can resolve, the whole thing with this part. It transforms the behavior that the part started with. It transforms, these parts also have limiting beliefs. It transforms those as well, and so it just transforms the whole experience.
So, as you said, core transformation, there is a pragmatic step-by-step process to go through, a series of questions as I've understood it. But what I'm also hearing from you, Tamara, is not just to intellectualize the process. It's what I hear is it's also experiential. Like it's experiencing a sunset or a mountain view and such. I mean, you can describe it, but it's not the same as actually being there and seeing it, and whether it's the sunset or the mountain view or whatever it is. Is that what I understand you're saying?
Oh, totally. Yeah. In fact, sometimes people who have been intellectually exploring concepts like, the importance of oneness, or, I'm a human being. I'm not a human doing, that kind of thing. So, intellectually, they have these ideas before they even do core transformation. However, as they do core transformation, then they get an experience of it, oftentimes for the first time, and discover what they can actually do on a step-by-step level. Like you say, we're following steps here that actually make it very reliable that we're accessing these very deep states, and then allowing these very deep states to transform our day-to-day experience. So it's not just, like people who meditate can access really deep states. But then, I talked to somebody who said that, yeah, I could have a sense of peace and calm while I'm meditating. But then the problem is, it's like he was dealing with social anxiety. So
Yeah.
the problem is, then when I was in a social situation, the anxiety was still there. It didn't change
Yeah,
anything.
sure.
So with this, we can access these profound states of being in our experience
Mm.
and also transform these life patterns with them.
Yeah, so just to rewind back, because when we
Hmm.
talk about a core state being a sense of beingness, so a core
Hmm.
state is not something that you do or it's a specific emotion. It's not something like we've talked about, you intellectualize, but it's an experience. It's as you said, a state. For me, it's kind of hard to put your finger on it. It's something that you have to. I guess the best way is something you've already said. It's something you have to experience. The core state is something you have to experience. But for many of us, it's like an archaeological dig. It's under layers and layers and layers. And as I understand core transformation, our brains are thinking that we have to go through all these layers, all these patterns that whether it's a behavior, emotion, whatever it is, to reach that core state. But what you've been doing for 30 years, you and your colleagues and such have been able to cut through the layers to get to the core state. And that is what core transformation is. Is that what I understand?
Yes, yeah. So we actually work through those layers
Mm,
to first reach the core state. And then once we've reached it, though, and this part has it, then there's a profound learning that takes place. And
mm,
that is that it's not necessary to go through all those layers anymore.
mm. Yeah.
So whatever this state is, like for example, so it gets to a sense of just this warm fullness that so then
Mm,
there's a learning that happens that this warm fullness, it doesn't really work to try to get there through all those layers. What does work is just to step into it and have it. And so then we do some additional steps then to begin to train this unconscious part of us,
mm.
and train the system that this wonderful warm fullness, or whatever it is, whatever the words are, that this can just be there as an ongoing way of being, and that this just allows everything to be different.
I was wondering, from your 30 years of experience doing this, what do you believe are the reasons why our brains tend to create these complexities of layers, to
Mm.
sort of bury this core state, this beingness you've talked about. From your experience, and I know there's probably varied reasons, but have you seen over the years if there are some sort of common reasons why the brain does this?
Yeah, so with core transformation, actually, the beauty of it is that we don't need to understand why,
Mm,
because instead we understand what to do about it. Now, that said, after all this experience, I have
mhm.
some ideas as to why that I can share.
Please, I'm
And
curious.
I just want everybody to know, though, that these kinds of ideas of why it happens that way, it's not necessary to, it doesn't really matter if they're right or
Mm,
not.
mm,
Somebody could have a different idea of why that happens, and core transformation would still work, because
mm,
we're working with the structures that we can discover in our experience that are there now
mm,
in the present. So that said, one way of kind of presenting or understanding why this happens is that, so when we're very young, we start out in life
mhm,
as a whole and complete consciousness. And developmental psychologists even say that when we're very young, we don't differentiate between what's us and what's everything else. And then, of course, as we grow and develop, we develop more of a sense of, here's me, there's everything else. And along the way, all of us, when we're growing up, have something happen that we don't know what to do with. We don't know what to do
mm,
about it. So something happens that feels very unsafe, or just totally confusing. And so when this happens, then our system tends to respond to this by splitting off a part of us, to try to deal with this, to try to find some way to cope and develop some kind of coping strategy. And anytime we split off apart like that, then this part of us is separate from our whole beingness. So it's separate from this core state experience, and its purpose is to just run this coping mechanism to try to deal with this life experience as best it can. And it could be even that it's found a coping mechanism that does help us survive get through the situation. And at the same time, now this poor part of us is cut off from its sense of beingness, its true inner essence. And it's running this pattern that, it might be useful in some situations, but it's probably not useful in a lot of other situations. But its job is to run this pattern to try to, keep us safe or, help us get our needs met in some way.
I was wondering if to kind of ground this with an example, could you provide a sort of a real life example of someone who's sort of experienced significant change through the core transformation process? Maybe to sort of define maybe what they were struggling with and how did the process help them?
Yeah, thanks for asking it. There are just so many examples. So, since you mentioned what somebody was really struggling with, so an example comes to mind of somebody who was a salesman, and what he was struggling with is that he felt this internal pressure to make the sale. And this sense of pressure, in fact, was so uncomfortable for him that he thought he'd have to change careers over it. And the thing was that initially he just struggled with it. He tried to suppress it. He tried to let it go. He tried not to feel this inner pressure. And maybe ironically, but the more he struggled with it, the worse it got. And that's often what happens actually with people is that, this inner part of us, it's trying to do something positive. And so like maybe it's trying to keep us safe. This part, from this part's perspective, oftentimes our whole survival is at stake, and so even if it's not really true in real life. So oftentimes the more we struggle with something, then the worse it gets. And so that was true of this person. And then when he did core transformation, instead of struggling with this inner part of himself, he did the opposite, which is he explored, what does this part actually want? And he went through this process of, deeper and deeper outcomes that the part wants, finally got to a core state, some kind of beingness state. And then that transformed the whole issue. In fact, it transformed it so completely that when he was done with the core transformation process, he said he just wasn't at all attached to making the sale. He really didn't care if he made the sale or not. He was in this wonderful state. Now, the interesting thing was that when he went back into sales situations, his sales actually doubled that year for one of his main lines, and it increased like a huge amount for his other main line, because instead of this pressure to make the sale, he was able to just be present with the customer and discover, what does the customer actually want and need here? And he was able to connect more authentically with the customer, and so yeah, and so this man actually is my husband now. We weren't married at the time that he did the core transformation process on this, but now he is, and so I can confirm that indeed he is still in sales all these decades later.
I'll invite him on this show. But so in a sense, what I hear is that going through the core transformation process and going straight to being connected with himself, sort of finding the whole, uniting the fragmented parts per se into the whole again. In a sense, has he, your husband, rewritten the narrative, sort of in a sense that he's reframed or reappraised how all those years ago he approached sales? Is that part of what has also happened? And is, the brain is a storytelling machine, and we understand the world around us and our place in that world and the people around us through the stories. And that's how we make sense of the world. In the case of your husband going through this process, would you say at some level he rewrote the narrative and was conscious of the narrative that he assigned to, in this case, sales?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And I would say that the story, the narrative
Hmm.
is how we make sense of things, and it's how we consciously make sense of things. We have it's a way we can kind of relate to our experience and have it make sense. And with core transformation, we actually get to transform it at an even deeper level than the story. And so the story changes as a side effect, we could say, because what's underneath the story changes. And and a stage of the process that's a little bit like a later stage that I haven't talked about yet is that we get to grow up these parts of us. So, with a lot of kinds of parts work, actually, they don't have a way of growing these parts up because they don't have a way of getting to the core state. But when the part of us reaches the core state and it's transformed with the core state, this allows the part now to be free of whatever early, situation it was that the part was formed in. So now it can be free from that. It can evolve up through time, filled with the core state. And as it does on the unconscious level, everything changes. This part gains, more maturity, more resources. And we just allow this to happen mainly at an unconscious level. Sometimes a person does have some conscious insights about the story, so to speak. And other times it's just allowed to happen at an unconscious level so that then the person then just can notice that, oh gosh, it's just so different now. It's like that the whole thing has changed.
In part one of the conversation, we discovered that core transformation is a gentle process of internal exploration aimed at transforming behaviors, emotional responses, and patterns of thinking. Now, the experience, depending upon individual, well, it can vary from mild to profoundly impactful. Tamara also introduced to us the three major components. The first is unconscious parts. Often we recognize that certain behaviors, feelings, or thoughts are not working for us. Now, while we consciously understand this, just knowing about it doesn't change the issue. This is because these behaviors are driven by an unconscious part of us operating on autopilot. In a sense, it's like a part of us is acting independently of our conscious desires. The second component is positive purposes. When we tap into this unconscious part, we find that even dysfunctional behaviors or thoughts have a positive intent. However, the way they achieve this intent is counterproductive. Understanding this helps in reorienting these parts towards more helpful behaviors. Now, the third component, well, that's the core state. This is an experience of our true inner nature. Discovering the core state is not merely an intellectual exercise, but one that needs to be experienced. Now, by accessing this profound state of being, well, we can transform these unconscious parts that are working against us despite their positive intent. We also explored why the brain creates dysfunctional behaviors, thought patterns, and unhelpful emotions. Well, as we grow, we develop a sense of self that is distinct from everything else. Along life's journey, well, we all encounter situations that feel unsafe or confusing, and our system responds by splitting off a part of us to cope with these challenges. Now, this coping mechanism, though useful in specific situations, well, in many other situations, they are quite unhelpful. When this part splits from our whole being, well, it separates us from our core state experience. Now, as we move into part 2, we will explore more about core transformation. Tamara will also lead us through a short practice, giving us a first-hand experience of this transformative process. So now let's slip back into the stream for part 2 with my fascinating conversation with Tamara Andreas. What I'm hearing is that self-awareness, or the process of core transformation, is a key and integral part. One of the things I find that is troubling for most of us is the sense of self-compassion. We can show compassion for everyone else, but I was wondering how integral is self-compassion in the core transformation process?
Oh, thank you for asking this. Self-compassion is totally integral to the process.
Mm,
However, a person doesn't need to think that they already are good at it. Most people, like you're saying, most people aren't really that good at it, or
mm,
at least not as fully as they could be. And core transformation, as we do it, it helps us to develop this because well, like here's an example.
please.
So there's somebody that I worked with, and every time when we start working with these parts, the first thing that we do once we access this inner part of us is we say on the inside, "Thank you for being there." And this particular woman, she couldn't do that. She just couldn't. She's like, I hate these parts. She thought they were evil, you know. And so then, we have a workaround for that, so to speak. And so, well, if you can't do it congruently, then you don't need to fake it. So
Mm,
because we want to be true to ourselves, we want to be honest with ourselves as we're doing this. But if you would just if this works for you, just let this part know that you're open to discovering something positive about it. Or you can thank the part for me, the guide. You can thank the part for me for being there because I know that it has a positive purpose. And so that's what she would do. And then
mm,
she would ask the part, "What do you want?" And then the answer that she got back might be something like, "Oh, this part wants me to stand up for myself. Oh, this part actually, really cares about what's really special here, what's really special about me." And then she'd go, you know, I actually like this part. It'd be a surprise.
mm,
And I worked with her over time, and even after she intellectually understood, and
mm,
she had a lot of experience with this, that every single part we worked with did have a positive purpose.
mm,
She said, it's kind of funny, that every time I'm surprised that it wants something positive. You'd think by now I would know it, but every time I'm surprised, and so it helped her develop this
mm.
self-compassion that she was totally not in any state of self-compassion at the beginning, and it helped her over time, more and more, part by part, develop this self-compassion.
And I think that's a core tenet that I really liked about the process when I read through the book and speaking to you previously is that it helps to develop these self-regulating parts of ourselves that are needed. Because another part that I think is very important in order to build equanimity and resilience is the sense of self-efficacy, where we can take control, where we can actually take action and invest effort. And it's not just some sort of random process, but the core transformation process is just that. We engage with those different parts with ourselves and we actively engage through experience. Yes, it's emotional, it's intellectual, but it's also experiential in the
Mhm.
sense that and that's all I wanted to say is just I like that part because the self-efficacy I think is also an integral element of this core transformation process.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. This gives us a chance that we can make a
Mm,
choice to do something that is efficacious, that works to change our experience. And, ultimately, though, it's even beyond having control. Because if I'm having control, then that suggests kind of a top down thing of I am keeping things in check, or
mm,
I'm making things happen in a certain sense. Whereas with core transformation, we actually reach a state where there's nothing we need to control, because
mm,
instead, from the inside out, things just happen in a
mm.
way that's congruent. So instead of, it's like a part of me controlling another part of me, instead there's a sense of I am a whole being, and so I can make a choice as a whole rather than kind of imposing something on some inner part of myself.
I think thank you for making that distinction because I think maybe that is one of the maybe common misconceptions. I was wondering, maybe we could sort of segue into that. In your experience,
Mhm.
what do you believe some of the most common misconceptions or challenges people face when they first attempt core transformation?
Yeah, thank you for this. You have so many good questions, by the way, I have to say.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, some common some of these, nobody's ever asked me this before. So, some common misconceptions that people have. So, one very common one is that they have to understand the problem better. That if only they understand the problem well enough, it will just go away. And so, and you can see this out in the self-help world. There are so many books about how we can understand ourselves. And now, of course, self-understanding can feel good. It's like,
Mm,
oh, I discovered I'm not a bad person after all. Now I understand more how it works. So it can lead to something that is an improvement over
mm,
just, thinking I'm a bad person or something like that. However, that said, it doesn't in itself change the underlying patterns. And so for many people, as they're beginning core transformation, they're like trying to really understand these inner parts.
mm,
And then as we have more experience with it, it becomes easier and easier to kind of let go of that and just go
mm,
into the experience of it. And because, you know, understanding that's happening at a psychological level, we could say. And doing core transformation, we go beyond that psychological level to what we might call a spiritual level or a beingness level. And that is where the change actually happens. It's beyond conscious understanding. So
mm.
yeah, so that's one thing. There, just real quickly, a few other
Please,
misconceptions
please.
people often have. One is, of course, this idea that these inner parts are bad. And, somebody might not say that consciously. They might have an intellectual understanding that that's not true. And yet there tends to be this misconception going on at some level that these parts are bad. Another thing that can be a misconception for people who have done a lot of other kinds of inner work.
Mm,
So there are a lot of people who are aware that we have these inner limiting beliefs and that it's important to transform these inner limiting beliefs in
mhm,
order to make changes. There are many people, have learned this from other kinds of methodologies. However, what they think is that we have to identify these limiting beliefs in order to change them. And actually, that isn't true because when we're doing core transformation, like, okay, for example, there was somebody was working with at the surface, her experience was that she was just obsessed with her ex-boyfriend who had left her and she felt this abandonment.
mm,
And so she was just obsessed. And this inner part of her that was running this, that was creating this sense of, abandonment and obsession with her ex-boyfriend, this inner part had a limiting belief that the only way that she could feel safe and loved was through her ex-boyfriend. And so now the thing is, we didn't need to take this limiting belief and examine it and, work with it at a belief level exactly. But instead, we worked with this inner part to get to go through the process of stepping into what it really wanted. And so we got to something that was deeper than
mm.
this limiting belief, which was I don't remember right now what the core state was, but it was a core state that was, I think it was like a warm sense of fullness. And when this part got there, it's like her whole body looked like something was melting, and she just had this radiance or glow that was palpable. And then this transformed the whole, everything that the part wanted, including this limiting belief, but without having to examine it as a belief. So that just the whole thing was transformed from, we call it the 3 B's of human experience. So the sense of being was transformed, all the limiting beliefs were transformed, and the behavior was transformed because everything about this part was integrated with that sense of warm fullness that was there at a beingness level.
And so you've mentioned your husband with sales pressure. You've mentioned this woman with her sense of self-worth or safe linked to her boyfriend and such. Um, I mean, how long does it take a person to go through the core transformation process? Is it something they do in a single sit down, or does it depend on the complexities where they may have to do it 2 or 3 or multiple times?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, in the case of my husband, that was a one session thing. He only did that session. In the case of the woman who had initially this obsession with her ex-boyfriend, that was also a one session thing. I believe I worked with two parts in that session.
Okay.
And and often to work with one part, when we're getting started, it might take an hour to work with one part. After a while, maybe 45 minutes. And for many people, the time gets shorter. So for some people, after a while, it just takes half an hour or maybe even less to work fully with one part. Um, yeah, so here's another example though, because I don't want to give people the idea that everything is just like, one shot fix, right? So there was a man who was actually the one I mentioned before, who was dealing with this social anxiety.
Yes, yes.
And so when he learned core transformation, he used it with anxiety and also anything else that came up for him. He used it with everything, that came up for him for a month. And he was using core transformation every day with anxiety and sometimes with other things too. And at the end of that month, he had no more social anxiety. And plus, a bunch of other things had changed as well since he was just working with everything. Another example, I think it's really useful for people to know that if you're working with something really significant, that it can be useful to have some persistence with it. So there was a man who actually had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And now I don't want people to think, oh, we have found the cure for schizophrenia. Anybody that does this is going to be transformed. However, this was this person's experience. He had
Yes.
been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and the expectation was that he was going to go into an institution for the rest of his life. And however, his family knew somebody who was a very skilled guide with core transformation. And so they arranged for him to be guided through core transformation every day in a row, actually, and for 30 days. And at the end of that 30 days, there was no more schizophrenia. And this was, now I think we have at least 20 years of follow-up on this. And he stayed in touch with his guide. And, he invited his practitioner to his wedding, so he really, has been living a totally normal life. That's totally what was not expected. And with something like that, there's somebody else that I know who, now, of course, I'm a coach, and so I don't diagnose people. I don't work in that kind of diagnostic realm. Instead, I just work with people's experience of whatever it is they're facing, what's their experience of that. However, of course, therapists do diagnose people and work with those categories. So I interviewed somebody who is a licensed social worker, clinical social worker, and I asked her, and she's worked with actually thousands of clients for decades with core transformation as her primary method of intervention. And so I asked her, so is there any diagnostic category that you haven't worked with core transformation or haven't found it to be helpful? And she thought a little bit and she said, no, there isn't. She's worked with all of the major ones, the major diagnostic category, and found it to be helpful with each one. And, and sometimes, it takes more than just 1 or 2 sessions for something that's more significant. It might take a year. Or it might take less than that. Oftentimes it takes less time than a person would ever expect. Obviously, so what's unique about core transformation, we could say, is that we can use it for getting change quickly that may be just one session. And if there's something with more components to it, more moving parts, so to speak, we can work with all of those components. And so we can work over time and include everything that is involved with generating that experience the person wants to change.
I think so far you've probably pressed a lot of our listeners' curious and inquisitive buttons right now. So for those listeners who are facing challenges, they may be emotional, they behavioral, maybe they're thought-based. When and how can they begin to apply the CT or the core transformation process? And what maybe are some of the first steps?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And so one thing is that I can do a guide right now, just guiding the listeners through the first steps of the process. And of course, it's not the same as having somebody guiding you one on one. However, it can, I think, help people just to dip their toe in at least. And for some people, they might, go with me over this all the steps that I'll be guiding. And for some people, they might just do the first couple. And in any case, it can help them dip their toe in. Would you
No,
like
I
for
think
me
that
to
would
do
be
that?
brilliant if we could. That would make it a very interactive episode. Let's jump right in. If you could walk us through it, that'd be
Oh,
great.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. So first, I'll just invite everyone listening to identify what is a pretty simple and mild to maybe medium, but fairly mild, um, let's say, feeling that you'd like to change. It's probably the easiest thing. So, for example, it could
Mm.
be feeling anxious in a specific situation. It could be feeling frustrated or feeling hurt by something, and yet it's not a super big deal. There's not any real harm that happened, and yet there's a hurt feeling. Or could be any kind of reaction to something that that would be worthwhile to explore, and it's not something that's a super heavy or super big deal. Okay, so pick something like that, and now I'd like to invite everyone to just take a moment and relax, and it's usually easier with the eyes closed to let the attention go inward and just notice all of your inner experience. Notice the space within the body and the space all around. And you can notice the breathing. You can notice any sense of constriction or a sense of inner images or thoughts, and just notice all of the inner experience that's there. And now, think of a recent time when this feeling that you'd like to change or this reaction you'd like to change emerged, where this happened. So it could be something that happened within the last day or the last week or even the last month, some recent time when this happened. And now step into this experience, this situation, as if it's happening right now. So you can see around you what you could see at the time it was happening. So it's like you are there, you're in this environment where it's happening, and you can hear the sounds that are present when it's happening. And you can begin to notice your response to it, your feeling, your reaction to what's happening. And as you notice this feeling or reaction, check inside. Where is the part of me that's generating this? And just notice the first location that comes to mind as you're checking with this. And it's okay to guess. So noticing the feeling, noticing the reaction, ask, where is the part of me that's generating this? It could be anywhere inside the body, could be inside the head. It could even be in the space around. And When you notice this, when you notice the location of the part, and again, it's totally fine to guess if you're not sure, then begin welcoming this part, thanking it for being there as best you can, even if it's something you don't like. We're not thanking the part for what we don't like, though. We're thanking this part for being there because we can already know that it wants something positive, even though we don't know what it is yet. So thank the part for being there as best you can. Or if it's easier, you can just thank it for me because I know that it wants something positive. Yeah. And as you thank this inner part for being there, you might already notice some shift in your experience, even if it's subtle. And now, on the inside, ask this part, what do you want? And so just ask the question inside, and then just wait silently for a response to come back from this part of yourself. Or notice what happens at the location of the part in response to the question, what do you want? And the response could be an image, it could be a thought, it could be a feeling. And it's okay, even if you don't really understand the response, even if you couldn't put it into words, that's fine. Yeah. Now, so people who are going along with this, for the ride with this, some people might already be noticing a response, and some people might not. And either way is okay, because the most important part of this exploration is just having this intention of noticing the part, noticing where it is, and thanking it for being there. That's really the most important thing, and that's something everybody can do. So, and for those who are noticing a response, I'll go on a little bit more. Okay, so let's say you've gotten a response from this part. The part might have given you a word like, I want safety, or I want love. Or the part might have given you an image, like sometimes it's just a picture of what's wanted, a picture of being embraced. Or, sometimes it doesn't even make sense. It could be a picture of a mountain or something. Or it might be a feeling like, oh, it's like now there's a sense of relaxing that's happening right at the location of the part. So whatever the response is, thank the part for its response. Just on the inside, say, thank you, part, for this response. And now, invite this inner part to step into or breathe into what it's like to already have what it wants. So if the part said it wants safety, invite the part to step into what it would be like to have safety fully and completely, just the way that it wants. Or if the part wants love, invite the part to step into or just relax into what it's like to have love fully and completely the way this part wants. And, we're not making this up consciously. We're inviting the part to step into its idea of what it wants, because we don't consciously know what the part wants, but the part knows. The part knows what it wants. So yeah, invite the part to step into what it would be like to have whatever it wants, fully and completely. Yeah. And as this part is experiencing this, whatever it is that it wants, we can ask this part, what do you want through already having this that's even deeper yet, even more important or core? And then again, just wait silently for the next response to come. And if you get another response, then you can just continue for a little longer at your own pace. Each time you notice a response, you can thank the part for its response and invite the part to step into or breathe into what it's like to already have what it wants, fully the way this part wants it, fully and completely. And then, give the part a moment for this. And then ask the part, when you have this already, what do you want through having this that's even deeper or more important or more core? That's right. And of course, people can use the pause button if, to take more time with this if they want. So, yeah. And if you do this continually, eventually you'll get to something that's at a beingness level, something like oneness, or a sense of presence, can be a sense of aliveness. There are many words that can be used. And what the experience, though, has in common is it's beyond just doing or getting. It's beyond thinking. It's beyond an emotional response to something in the world. It's a sense that's at a beingness level, something that just is. And that is the core state experience. And what's wonderful is that no matter what these parts have been through, the core state is always still there. This part of us has been disconnected from it. Through the core transformation process, we can help this part to reconnect with this core state that's been there all along. And it's really special to reconnect with it and to be in it again, to be filled with it again.
What I was thinking when I was going through this, I was thinking, like, my brain was picturing, these Russian dolls where you open one and you finally get to the core, and you get through each of the layers. I know that's not the particular vernacular, but I think you call it in the core transformation lingo outcome chain, where you start and such.
Yes, and it's totally fine to use that metaphor of layers, and it is. I think that's a really appropriate image, and it fits the Russian dolls, because we are getting to deeper and deeper levels of experience within this part that we're exploring.
And so I just have a little more sort of questions, a little maybe nuts and bolts. And as you said, you ask the emotion comes up or whatever it is, what do you want? And then you wait for a response. And you said it could come as an image, it may come as a thought, as a feeling. And that is to be just sort of defined as a sense of silence where the brain's just a little quiet. And then it will kind of percolate up in most cases. Is that what the idea is? It could, as you said, as an image or a metaphor or as a thought.
Yes. That's what happens. And if it doesn't happen, then that just means that there's something else that needs to happen first. And I don't want to get into all of that because that's really more advanced learning.
Sure.
And I want to leave people with more of a simple structure, a simple concept of how it works. But it is what happens every single time, unless there's something going on that that interferes with that, in which case we can work with that first and then come back and work with the part. So sometimes, I'll just give one example. Sometimes a person has chosen an inner part that doesn't yet feel safe enough to communicate with us, And so in that case, sometimes just spending more time thanking the part for being there is all that it takes. Just really acknowledging that we know that this part is doing the very best it can. We know that it's trying to accomplish something positive, and we'd really love to learn more about this part and to find out what is positive about it. To discover what it wants at a deeper level that's positive.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for taking us through the process because it makes it so much more, we can put our fingers on it when we go through it. It's not sort of the theoretical when we started, but the practical, how you filtered it. It's nice to be able to walk through the first few steps, understand it. Yes, it gets more complex and there's a deeper process, but then I think that's when people will want to reach out for you either to pick up the book. But do you run online courses or do you have these sort of webinars or live workshops and such? I was wondering maybe you could just touch base on that for those who may be curious to discover more.
Yeah. So, yes, we do online trainings, not only at a foundation level of learning the basic process, but beyond that as well. So, we teach people how to work with difficulties with the process that some
Mm,
individuals may have. So, we do an advanced training that's especially useful for people who are want to help others.
mm,
Although also we have many people take the advanced training because they want to get better at their own inner work. So it accomplishes both of those purposes. And then we also have a coach certification training. So somebody who's ready to go and wants
mhm,
to really learn this method, then you might as well go ahead and jump right into that. Now, that said, some people will want to take smaller steps at first to really know if this is truly for them. And so there are some free steps that can be taken, some free options. And you can find out about several of our free offerings if you go to andreasnlp.com/free. And so a couple of things there are with regards to core transformation. One is there's a free microbook. At least right now it's free. I'm not going to promise it'll be free forever,
mm,
but at this time we're giving it away for free, and it takes you through the first two phases of the process in a very easy way. It's a short book. You could read through all the you could read through it pretty fast,
mm.
and it gives you the steps of it that you can do on your own for the first two phases of the process. And it explains those steps, gives you tips for how to do most of them. Some of them are so easy they don't need a tip, but for most of them, there are a few, excuse me, a few tips there just in case. Yeah, so that's one option. And also it includes a live demonstration of the whole first two phases, a link to it, recorded demonstration. So yeah, there's a lot there. Then there's also a free intro that I've done that covers the ground a little bit differently than how we've covered it in this
Mhm.
podcast. So yeah, so again, andreasnlp.com/free to get the free stuff.
I'll make sure to have all the links so listeners can just click right through to the links and such.
Mhm.
I just want to thank you for your time today, Tamara. I was just wondering, in closing, is there any thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners today and myself?
Yeah, thanks. So, yes, something that I think is a really important thing to know and recognize is that each of you has a resource that is profound, that is indestructible and free. It is there. Even if you don't know how to be in touch with it, it's there and it will always be there. And with this process, we can make it systematic and easy and reliable to get there, to reach this resource, to live our lives more and more from a whole sense of our beingness.
Well, Tamara, thank you very much for today and the fascinating conversation. I'm hooked on it, and I see a lot of parallels of what you do and what I do. We come from two different disciplines, but I see a lot of overlap, and that really kind of rang my bell.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for making this kind of material available to such a wide audience. You're doing a really wonderful thing for the world in doing this, and I really appreciate that.
You're more than welcome, and thanks for the feedback, Tamara. We'll speak soon. Well, folks, I hope you found that conversation with Tamara as engaging and intriguing as I did. And as Tamara said, core transformation, well, it can help us reach a state where we don't feel we have to control or dominate a part of ourselves. And as Tamara said, CT focuses on 3 Bs. It helps us to transform dysfunctional behaviors, limiting beliefs, and a fragmented being. Tamara, a personal thank you from me to you for today's episode. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. And folks, remember, her micro book, Change Without Struggle, is available. It's free, and I will leave a direct link. And if any of you are interested in contacting Tamara directly, I will leave her contact information in the show notes also. And as a side note, I also interviewed her sister, Tamara Andreas, back in season 5, episode 20, and I will be sure to leave that link in the episode. But there is also her work on wholeness work, which is complementary to core transformation for any of those of you who are interested. Well, folks, here we are at the finishing line of yet another episode. And if you found this episode or any of the other episodes you've listened to helpful and think it could help someone else, please share it with them. It helps me to spread the word of this podcast. And if you're so inclined, please take a moment, drop into Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. I appreciate it. And until the next time we speak, the next time we continue this conversation, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.